Hey y'all, welcome to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Samantha Leanne and I talk about books. So first of all, hi, I have returned after taking most of the year off, but with it being a pandemic year, as well as every other thing that has happened this year, I kind of feel like it's forgivable, maybe. But we're back. So today, if you couldn't tell from the title of the video, yes, we will be talking about my favorite horror books of 2020. Now, first of all, my favorite horror books of 2020 were not all published in 2020. There are a couple that were published. However, most of them are previously to this year. And I just happened to read them and I loved them. So obviously I've been gone a long time. I did talk about a little bit why I had been gone in my previous video, which is the King Chronicles. And I know not all of you watch those videos, but if you care to click the little snippet or whatever and watch that. I mean, I didn't really go into detail, so I don't know why you would want to, but in case you missed that video and you do want to watch it, it's there. And I do plan on talking a little bit more about it, like whenever I do my stats video, but I have 12 books that I need to talk about right now. So we're just going to skip over all of that and we're just solely going to focus on books today. So also, I just want to point out that it has been a long time since I've sat down and done this. So I fully expect to stumble over my words and not explain things very well. So I'm apologizing in advance. But like I said, I do have 12 books to talk about. So let's just go ahead and jump right into those books. The first book that I'm going to talk about is Grady Hendrix's The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. This particular book, although I do have an e-arc for it, I do have a signed book plate. So I was really excited to have that. I do really love pretty much everything that Grady Hendrix has written. And I really, really loved this for a multitude of reasons. This book is about a woman named Patricia. She lives in Charleston, South Carolina. Which, by the way, I loved because South Carolina is my home state. Charleston, one of my favorite cities. So it was really nice to be able to read a book that I was familiar with the settings. But this is about Patricia. She has a husband who is basically a workaholic. She has kids and is in kind of like the money society, I guess, the money part of society of Charleston. So she has a lot of social obligations and appearances are extremely important. So to kind of keep her sanity, her and a bunch of her friends create a book club and they get really obsessed with true crime. So when a mystery presents itself and children on the other side of town start going missing, she takes it upon herself to do some investigating and gets involved in a crazy situation involving vampires. So reasons that I loved this book. There were moments where I was reading this that were extremely tense and actually scared me. I read the e-arc and then I actually listened to the audiobook as well. And there was a moment while I was listening to the audiobook and it was later at night and I was standing in the kitchen and there's a window right by the kitchen and I got really, really freaked out because I was like, oh my God, is there somebody by the window? Like, and I love books that can do that to me. There's only been a couple of them that have been able to do that. And also just, I love the characters that Grady Hendrix writes. I really loved Patricia. I do feel like she was relatable. He touched on a lot of different subjects like class and race and things like that while not getting too far into it or getting like super preachy about it. I really loved this book. A lot of people that have read it also really enjoyed it. So if you were on the fence about picking this up, like I highly, highly recommend picking this one. The next book that I'm going to talk about is Seed by Ania Ahlborn. I read a lot of Ania Ahlborn earlier this year. And there's only a handful of books of hers that I still have left to read. But Seed is one that really stuck in my head. You guys have seen me recommend The Devil Crept In, also by Ahlborn, a million different times. And Seed fucked me up, okay? I actually did talk about Seed in my possessions recommendation video, which I will also link up above in case you're new here and you haven't seen that. But this is the story of a father and his family. They are driving down the road and they are in a car accident because something runs out in the road. But nobody sees it except for the father and the youngest daughter. Well, after that accident, the daughter starts acting very strangely and starts exhibiting the symptoms of being possessed. The book itself is not very long, but the way that she's able to like build suspense and dread in such a short amount of time is something that I very thoroughly enjoyed. And the ending, y'all, that ending just totally fucked me up in the best possible way. So I won't give away anything else as far as the ending or the rest of the plot is concerned, because I feel like if you go into this blind, it's going to be a little bit better. But I thoroughly enjoyed this book, and it's definitely up there as one of my favorites of Ahlborn's. The next book that I'm going to talk about is Wylding Hall by Elizabeth Hand. This is a haunted house story, and it's probably going to make my next installment of haunted house recommendations because I just really liked it. It is also very short. It's actually novella length, and it is the story of a band. So think Daisy Jones and the Six, except not contemporary. Haunted house, creepy shit. So like that's the kind of vibe that you get. But the audiobook I highly recommend because I think I got it from my library actually. Or it was like free through Audible, I don't recall. But the audio has different voices for the different characters as they're telling the story, and you're getting snippets of everybody's version of the story, which is nice, you know, as things start to come together. And it makes you, to me, it made me connect with the characters just a little bit more, especially through the audio because of like emotion and things like that. I realized I said like Daisy Jones and the Six, but I didn't give you any other. It's about this band, like a folky kind of indie band, who go to this house, which is castle, house, whatever, that's supposedly haunted. It's kind of in the middle of nowhere. Nobody ever goes up there. But they go up there to do some like writing and recording for their new record. You know, weird shit happens. So that's pretty much the synopsis. Again, because it is so short, I don't want to go too far into detail about what it's about. So it's a nice short read. And I definitely recommend it. The next book that I am going to talk about was also published this year, and that is The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. This was actually the first book that I ever read by Stephen Graham Jones, and he is going to make another appearance on this list, and I read a couple of his other books since reading this as well. I truly loved this. This, to me, is a masterpiece of modern horror. Chances are, if you're watching my channel or if you're into horror at all, you're already familiar with Stephen Graham Jones. So this is kind of a twofold narrative, and you get multiple points of view. You have a group of Blackfeet who went on a hunting trip years and years ago, and it didn't go exactly the way that it should have gone, and it has sort of haunted each of them in different ways as the years have gone on, all kind of coming to a culmination as we meet each of these characters. So parts of this book are incredibly gruesome, but he does an amazing job weaving those gruesome sections with the social commentary, with really compelling characters and a compelling story that keeps you turning the pages. This is a book that I devoured very, very quickly. And it's a book that I also want to revisit again at some point in the future. Like I said, after reading this, I ended up devouring, I think, 3 of his other works, and I have a couple of other ones on my nightstand, so to speak. But if this is an author that you haven't picked up yet, I urge you to do so. This is a great one to start with. The next book on this list is My Soul to Keep by Tananarive, and this is it's kind of horror and kind of not. It's kind of like horror and then also like part fantasy. So My Soul to Keep is about a woman named Jessica, and she has this perfect life with this perfect husband and her perfect daughter, and her life is just amazing. But David, her husband, is harboring a secret, and that secret is he is a part of a tribe of the African immortals who have lived for over 400 years. He has a quality to his blood that makes him immortal, means that he cannot die, and events begin to unfold from that confession. I really loved this book. I loved the social commentary that Tananarive weaves throughout her narrative. This was my second book that I had read by her. I read The Good House, which it was between The Good House and this one as to which one was going to make the list. The Good House is probably a little bit more towards the side of horror, but this was a story that I absolutely could not stop thinking about. I'm actually, as of filming this, I'm in the middle of the second book in the series right now. It's a 4-book series. Her prose is one of the things that I think really makes this story. She just has, like, the way that she writes and the way that her characters think and everything, it just made for such a compelling story. And again, the pages kept turning, and even after I finished this book, I set it down because I'm terrible at finishing series. We all know this. I set it down and I could not stop thinking about it. And mind you, I read that months ago and I hadn't been able to get it out of my head. And I finally was like, I need to continue on with this story. So hence why I decided to pick up the sequel. Coming from me, the fact that I was like dead set on continuing the series, I think speaks for itself. It is a little bit more urban fantasy than horror. However, I do feel like it fits into the horror category because of the general suspense in which she writes in. And I think the suspense is the quality that you have to have whenever you're talking about horror. So that's why I included it, but you could definitely go with this one, or you could go with The Good House, also by her. Basically, if you haven't picked up her books, you really, really should. The next book that I am going to talk about is Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. This was the first book that I had read by her, and I really loved this. So this is about a younger girl. I say younger. I say younger because I'm in my 30s. So she's like late teens, early 20s. But she gets a letter from her cousin in Mexico and is like, I think that my new husband is poisoning me. I need you to come save me. So of course, what does she do? She goes to her cousin because her and her cousin are very close. And she gets to the house. And while her cousin is very ill, things aren't exactly what they seem to be. Extremely creepy vibe. The aesthetic of this book is amazing. Like, this cover suits the aesthetic of this book and the general feeling so well. The other thing that it made me think of was Crimson Peak, the film Crimson Peak. The stories aren't similar for those two things, but it's, again, that aesthetic and that vibe. And the writing in this is absolutely wonderful. I cannot wait to read more from her. I think it's Gods of Jade and Shadow that everybody talks about how amazing it is. I'm really looking forward to actually reading that one. But this book was absolutely fantastic. Loved it. If you're looking for a strong female protagonist in horror, this reads a little bit to me more like young adult horror almost. So strong female protagonist with a amazing Gothic vibe. This is definitely a book you want to pick up. Next, I'm going to talk about another Stephen Graham Jones book, and that is After the People Lights Have Gone Off. And this is actually a collection of short stories. I read this one fairly recently, and I actually listened to the audiobook because I think I got it from my library or something along those lines. But anyway, collection of short stories. I finished this a couple of weeks ago and I am still thinking about some of these short stories. But from the very first story of this book, I was completely drawn in. And short story collections are so incredibly hit or miss for me a lot of times, but I cannot think of any off the top of my head that I did not like from this collection. One of the things that was really cool is we saw the short story that I'm fairly certain was the inspiration or the beginning piece for his full-length novel Mongrels, which I also really enjoyed. I read earlier this year. So that was really cool to see. There was a short story that was centered around The Man in the Black Suit, which is a short story by Stephen King from his collection, Everything's Eventual. That is one of my favorite short story collections from Stephen King for nostalgic reasons mainly. But that story in particular is one that has always stuck with me. And so to see a story about that story and the feelings that that story kind of create was amazing, and I loved that. Definitely a lot of death, a lot of gruesomeness, a lot of horror throughout this collection. I feel like if you haven't read Stephen Graham Jones, I feel like this would probably be a really great sampling of his writing. So if you are looking at picking up some of his work but you don't really know where to start, I feel like that would be a really good option. The next book that I'm going to talk about is Summer of Night by Dan Simmons. So let me start out by saying, if you enjoy books that have a very similar feeling to, say, It by Stephen King, that whole young friend group dynamic, this is a book that you should pick up. It's definitely on the lengthier side, but it didn't feel like it was super lengthy as opposed to some of his other books that I have read. I did very much enjoy the story. Again, that friend dynamic and just the general creep factor of the small Illinois town that they're in and, the circumstances in the story. I did really enjoy that. I also really loved that the central bad place in this book is actually a school, which is so funny to me because it's a book, for kids. about kids. So it would only make sense that it's a school that would be the bad place because, you know, kids hate school and all that sort of thing. But again, I really loved the writing, the language, the dynamic between the characters. It all felt very authentic to me, and I did really enjoy that. Also, let me just point out that whenever I first picked up this book, I, for some reason, was under the impression that it was about vampires. And I think it was because the Summer of Night. It's not about vampires, so don't go into it thinking that. But yes, I did very much enjoy this, and I would highly recommend, even though I wouldn't recommend some of his other stuff. The next book that I'm going to talk about, you guys have already seen me talk about a couple times, and that is Come Closer by Sara Gran. This is a story about a woman who has this very idyllic life. She has a great husband, she has a great marriage, she has a great job, and suddenly she starts to feel less and less like herself. You are taken on a journey with our main character and her descent into, is this a mental health issue? Is this something a little bit more sinister? It is very short. I think I actually read it in one sitting and just absolutely loved it. I can't recommend it highly enough. It was terrifying because of how real it felt, and I struggle with a way to explain that adequately. But it felt like something that could happen to anyone. And so I think that's one of the reasons that I found it to be so compelling. But I've talked about it more in my possessions recommendation video, so you can also see me talk about that there. So I won't talk about it anymore, but I really, really loved it. The next book that I'm going to talk about is, let's all act surprised, If It Bleeds by Stephen King. This was his latest release that he released this year. It is actually a collection of 4 novellas. And I really liked all of the novellas, but I think the star of this collection for me was the title story, If It Bleeds, which is revisiting some of our characters that we know and love. Holly Gibney from the Mr. Mercedes universe or whatever. I can't remember the actual trilogy name for some reason. Like, it is just absolutely escaping me right now. But it connects with both that and the book The Outsider. So if you have not read The Outsider, do not read that story. You really need to read The Outsider to appreciate it in all its glory. But I loved that story so much. I found it so compelling and I didn't want it to end. And it also helps that I just really love those characters. But the rest of the stories in this were actually really interesting. I enjoyed them. I think the only one that I didn't love as much was The Life of Chuck. That one was, I think that one went over my head a little bit. But Mr. Harrigan's Phone was a good one, as well as Rat. I did very much enjoy both of those. But I think that some of the books that King has come out with in the last couple years have just been so good. You know, I loved The Outsider. I loved The Institute. I really loved this collection of stories as well. We're just going to forget that Sleeping Beauty even exists. But I find, and I don't know if that's an unpopular opinion, I find that his stories from the last several years have been really enjoyable. And this was no exception for me. So the next book we're going to talk about is A God in the Shed. I went into this book with like no expectations whatsoever. I think I actually got this from either Kindle Unlimited or I had gotten it on sale or something like that. So I didn't really have any expectations going into it, and I ended up really, really loving it. The story itself is about a very small town who has been terrorized by a serial killer for the last 2 decades, and suddenly they think that they have finally caught the killer, except for the fact that the killings are still happening. And so you end up following various characters throughout the town as they go on their quest to discover what's really going on in the town and discover that it's actually something a little bit more dark and a little bit more sinister than any of them had originally anticipated. The thing that really grabbed me about this book is just the opening chapter. The opening chapter was excellent. It really drew me in, and after reading that, I had to know what was going on. I needed more information. It's a story that really touches on the theme of regret, and I found that it did a very good job of that. There were points where I was reading it where I was like, that right there, that's really good life advice, and I really love it whenever I find a book that is able to like give me those little nuggets in there. So I did find it really enjoyable. It was a really quick read. and I definitely recommend it. And the last book that I'm going to talk about today is The Siren and the Specter by Jonathan Janz. This was my first book by Jonathan Janz, and I was very much impressed. He's an author that I've seen a lot about on Bookstagram and BookTube, so I was really eager to read one of his books, and I was not disappointed. This story follows a guy by the name of, I think, Michael, who is invited by one of his friends to stay the summer, I think, or a couple of weeks or something, at this house that he has bought because it's haunted. Well, here's the thing. Michael's like the #1 supernatural, like, skeptic person, you know, who like writes books and stuff about that. But it turns out that this house and this case is unlike any that he has experienced before. And it turns out that this is probably what's going to make him a believer of the supernatural. So this book was full of hateable characters. Everybody sucked, which sometimes to me is compelling. Like, there wasn't anybody that was redeemable except for the children characters. And it definitely ticked all the boxes as far as horror. Like, there was a lot of real gruesome shit that was in here. There's a lot of real gruesome stuff, a lot more than I was expecting. And some of it did involve children, and that was a little bit hard to stomach. So definitely huge trigger warning for child sexual abuse. And just childhood trauma in general. That part was definitely not enjoyable to read at all. But those things aside, I do really like his writing style. I like the story overall, and I'm really looking forward to reading more of his books. So, all right. So those are my favorite horror books of 2020. As previously stated, not all of them were published in 2020, but they were books that I read that I really loved. So, have you read any of these books? If you have, make sure you comment down below and let me know. Tell me what you thought of them, share with me some of your favorite reads of 2020. I am dying to know in the comments. So, upcoming videos that you can expect. You can expect a video that discusses my favorite everything else books that aren't horror, plus my most disappointing reads for the year 2020. You can expect a stats video where I just kind of wrap up what my year in reading looked like, and we'll get a little bit more personal in that video as well. We're scripting some more King Chronicles because I am, just FYI, I am all the way up to the Tommyknockers in that read through. But I'm way behind in terms of videos, so I really do need to get caught up there, as well as anything else that you guys may want to see. If there's something that you want to see, I think I have some recommendations videos. True crime is definitely one of them because I went on a huge true crime binge earlier this year. Any other recommendations videos that you want to see, go ahead and drop those in the comments down below. And I don't know, maybe after the first of the year, we'll like do some lives or something. If that's something that you guys are interested in, if anybody still watches my channel, since I haven't posted in 8 million years. But that's all I have for you guys today because this video has been long enough. Don't you guys love that my return is like way fucking long? Did we expect anything else from me? The answer is no. No, we did not. So it feels good to be back. It feels good to be sitting in front of the camera again. I feel like I was all over the place and was not very articulate, but we'll just go with it and we'll keep going. Okay. Anyway, so if this is your first time here, hi, hello, and welcome. If you like what you see and you want to see more, make sure you click thumbs up. Make sure you hit subscribe if you haven't already. And you can also turn on post notifications for when I do decide to upload content. As always, thank you guys so very much for watching, and I will see you all next time. Bye.